Sustainable development and innovation. What is the boost point of these ideas? Why were they developed? Is really something going on? Are these ideas a global concern? In which sense are these actions developed in EU, Germany, and more concrete in Freiburg? The answers to these questions will be given throughout this video. Sustainable development is defined as a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This definition was given in the report Our Common Future at the United Nations World Commission of Environmental Development in 1987. This concept is constructed over three pillars: economy, society, and environment. People, habitats, and economic systems are interrelated. In the same way, the long-term stability and success of societies rely on a healthy and productive population. What do we understand from innovation? Well, innovation is finding a better way of doing something. It's the application of better solutions that meet new requirements in society needs, goods, and markets. Makes a new original change that revolutionizes a market, a method of production, or the product itself. Where did everything begin? In the year 1985, a hole in the ozone layer was discovered over the Antarctica. You might be asking yourself, why making from this fact such a big deal? Well, the fact is that the ozone layer absorbs the infrared and ultraviolet radiation. The emissions of depleting substances and GHG gases contribute to the destruction of this shield, enhancing global warming, consequently climate change. This means human health, nature, and the earth are in danger. This is a huge problem that concerns every human being on earth. Because of that, the international community was gathered to initiate a long process of fighting pollution and avoid global warming. This global action started with the Vienna Convention in 1985, that was in force in 1988. It was a multilateral environmental agreement ratified by the 197 countries. In 1987 took place the Montreal Protocol, where the first targets were settled: reduction of ozone layer depleting substances, gradual elimination of CFC gases, and reduction of freezing HCFCs gases. 3 years later, in 1990, was celebrated the London Protocol, where a new goal was settled. By the year 2000, CFC and halogens must be completely eliminated. After the huge pollution accounted in 1990, 7 years later the Kyoto Protocol was gathered by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, founded in 1992. This protocol is an international agreement linked to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, pronounced in 1997 but became effective since 2005. It sets binding obligations on industrialized developed countries to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. The main goal of this treaty is to reduce emissions of the 5 main greenhouse gases producers on industrialized countries by 5% relative to 1990 levels. The 191 parties with the EU that ratified it left some countries outside. The USA ratified but did not sign it, Canada, which withdrew from it in 2011, Andorra, and South Sudan. Developing countries such as India and China are not obliged to commit with it. Despite some notable successes, there has been little or no progress after all the conventions and treaties that have taken place after Kyoto's Protocol. By looking more closely at those objectives, it becomes clear that the overwhelming majority are action-oriented rather than target-oriented. This means the express commitment of governments to take action rather than commit governments to achieving specific, measurable, and time-bound targets. Climate change presents very serious global risks, and it demands an urgent global response. This was stated in the Stern Review on the Economics of Climate Change. It's a report published for the British government in 2006 by the economist Nicholas Stern. The Stern Review tries to build an understanding of the economics of climate change, such as greenhouse gases economics or the transition to a low-carbon economy and adoption to consequence climate change. This is a problem that concerns every human being on the planet. Climate change is regarded as the greatest and widest case in market failure ever seen. In order to solve it effectively, an international cooperative way of acting together with a long-run analysis is needed. If we act with determination, and early mitigation cost will be strongly reduced. The action now can have a limited effect in 40 to 50 years, but what we do in the following 10 to 20 years can have a profound effect on climate. So we should see mitigation as an investment now to avoid future risk. The later this problem is confronted, the more costly and difficult it will be to solve it. Many impacts will have irreversible changes. Adaptation policy is crucial. Some policies are suggested in this review. Overcome market failures, have equity and risk mitigation at its core, promote sound market signals, and maintain equity and risk priorities as top priorities.
A lot of the analysis of the implications of greenhouse gases have dealt with social problems. I mean, the prospect of civil unrest, the prospects of water shortages. Your Stern report that you conducted for the British government was a balance sheet analysis. I mean, it really did show what the cost of solving this problem is and what the cost of doing nothing. And that report seemed to be a game changer. I mean, I really sense the dialogue has changed as a consequence of that kind of hard-nosed analysis. Do you get the same sense?
Well, I do think the discussion's moved on, and what the science tells us and what the economics has to go straight to is the magnitude of these risks. Mm-hmm. Now, what we're describing with those kinds of risks is a world where rivers change, where some places become deserts. Much of southern Europe would become like a desert. Some areas would be underwater. What we're doing is redefining where people could live. And if we do that as a world, then hundreds of millions of people will move, probably billions of people will move. We're talking about gambling the planet. We're talking about a radical change of the way in which human beings could live and where they could live, and indeed how many of them could live. And the costs of that are just enormous. And what we're looking at then is what would it cost us to change the way we do things compared to the magnitude of those kind of risks I just described.
Getting closer to our case study framework, we want to introduce you to the European Union's action in sustainable development and innovation fighting climate change. The European Union has been regarded as a leader in climate change actions. Connie Hedegaard, European Commissioner for Climate Change Action, said, "The EU is clearly delivering on its Kyoto commitments. The EU has reduced its emissions significantly since 1990 while expanding its economy. This further demonstrates that climate policy can be implemented in a way that fosters jobs and growth. Our 20% reduction target for 2020 is also within reach thanks to our climate and energy legislation. And through additional policies, we are actually on track to overachieve our target. The European Union has succeeded in cutting its greenhouse gas emissions 80% since 1990. The EU has also overachieved its reduction commitment under the first period of the Kyoto Protocol by a wide percent."
Well, there are really many reasons. One very good reason is that climate change unfortunately didn't stop because we became busy with handling the economic crisis. But also another good reason is that investors need to get the signal. What can they count on after 2020? They're already planning for this. And the third very good reason is that even during these economic crisis years, in Europe we spend almost 1 billion euros each day to pay for our imported fossil fuels. Don't people think that it would be wise to bring down that kind of cost and at the same time do something good for the climate?